Welcome to this video. This is Venkat from AcuteLearn. So primarily AcuteLearn is a training institute. Provides trainings on various technologies like the VMware, Citrix, Microsoft, EMC, NetApp, and various the Cisco and other technologies. So for any kind of a training needs, so you can reach us on trainings@acutelearn.com. Okay. So in this video, we are going to talk about the hardware and software requirements for installation of a forefront identity manager, which is called as a FIM 2010 SP1 environment. And we are going to discuss about the SQL Server database installation and the requirements for the FIM 2010 SP1. The next video will consist of the installation of a FIM 2010 R2 prerequisite softwares. So after that, the next video, the third video, will consist of the performing a 2010 R2 prerequisite task. The fourth video will talk about the installation of a FIM, the sync service, the FIM portal service, the reporting services, the password registration portal, and the reset portals of it. The fifth video will talk about the post installation activities to be performed for successful the FIM 2010 setup environment. So let's go ahead. So today we'll look at in this video, the hardware and software requirements for installation of 2010 SP1. So the overall software environment required for Windows FIM is an Windows Server 2008 R2. It requires a SQL Server 2008 R2. It requires a SharePoint Foundation 2010. It requires a FIM 2010 software and requires a System Center Service Manager. And requires an Exchange server. So these are all the software requirements for a better FIM 2010 environment. So in order to achieve that, so we need a server which is acting like an Active Directory, which should consist of a Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows Server 2008, and a minimum of 4 GB RAM with 1 core processor. Requires another server for an Exchange, Windows Server 2008 R2, and Exchange Server Software 2010. Requires a 4 GB RAM and 1 core processor and minimum of 40 GB space, hard disk space. And another server which is for FIM portal application FIM synchronization service, SharePoint Foundation, password registration portal, and password reset portal. So in some environments, so you might have a separate server for password registration portal and a separate server for password reset portal. So in this demonstration, I'm using a one single server for the FIM portal environment, FIM synchronization service, the SharePoint Foundation, the password registration portal, and the password reset portal. A minimum of 4 GB of RAM, a 2-core processor with minimum of 40 GB hard disk space. And another server which is for System Center, Service Manager, Data Warehouse. So here we'll also be installing the System Center Service Manager. So System Center Service Manager Data Warehouse. So it requires a 4 GB of RAM, requires a 1-core processor for deployment, and a minimum of 40 GB hard disk space is required. So we are using another server for a SQL Server database. Requires a SQL Server 2008 R2 database. So wherein for the FIM portal and the service system server service manager is going to use. The SQL Server 2008 R2, a 4 GB of RAM with 1-core processor and 40 GB hard disk. So on all these 3 server, 4, 5 servers, so in my environment, I'm using a Windows Server 2008 R2 as the operating system. So on top of that, so the rest AD, Exchange, all the other applications will be installed. So keep it in hand, the softwares, the SQL Server 2008 R2, the SharePoint Foundation, the FIM, System Center Service Manager, and Exchange Server applications. So we have an Active Directory, one server. We have one server which is for an Exchange purpose. So you have one server for database. So we have 2 servers for FIM purpose. So one server will be having a FIM synchronization server, FIM portal, System Center Service Manager, password registration portal, and the password reset portal. And they'll be connecting to this particular database for database purpose. And we'll have a System Center Service Manager database, data warehouse. And this is going to also connect to the DB server for these things. So all this one will be authenticating to the AD environment. So all the 5 servers should be part of an Active Directory environment. So that is the prerequisites for the Forefront Identity Manager 2010 SP1. So in the lab environment, so we have already set up the AD and Exchange. So we should start with the SQL Server application. So if you look at my environment, so I have one server which is acting like an Active Directory, and another server for the database purpose, and another server for an Exchange, and another server for FIM portal, and another server for System Center Service Database server. Okay. So in this video, so we'll focus on the SQL Server installation for a 2010 environment. So first is then create a SQL Server service accounts in AD environment. So you need a 4 service accounts. So one for database services, one for agent SQL Server agent purpose, one for analysis purpose, one for reporting services. So there are 4 components which we are going to install as part of the SQL Server database. So one, we are going to use a SQL service account for database services, one account for a SQL Server agent, one account for SQL Server analysis purpose, one account for reporting purpose. So if you look at this particular environment, so I'm going to use ALVE SQL DB naming services. So I'm going to the Active Directory environment, create user account. So I'm using AL. So this does not need any specific privileges on Active Directory environment. It can be a normal account. So we just created the 4 user accounts for the SQL Server installation purpose. So go to the SQL Server. So I'm selecting the server where I want to install the SQL Server service. Log in with a user account which has an administrative privileges. So I already copied the SQL Server services. So it requires a .NET framework. So go to the roles, add roles, application server. So install. So to install the SQL Server database, you need a .NET framework. So I already copied the SQL Server software. So select the installation. New installation, add features to an existing installation. Select the licensing terms. Click on next. Click on next. So select a SQL Server feature installation. Select the database services. Select the full text search. Select the analysis services and reporting services and the management tools. The analysis services required for the data warehouse purpose. The reporting services are required for FIM reporting purpose. The SQL Server database and full text is required for the FIM portal database and system center service database. So you can change the path in your environment. So I'm selecting the default path. So click on next. Installation instance configuration. So select the default instance. So the default instance will be MS SQL Server. So here it is going to ask you the SQL Server agent account name. So select the account which we have created, browse. So the account which we have created for, and enter the password and set the type as automatic. So for database engine, the account which we created for database purpose. So enter the password. So make sure that all these 4 services are in automatic mode. So click on next. So it is going to verify the username and password. So the authentication method, so Windows authentication mode or mixed mode. So I'm going to select the Windows authentication mode, and I'm giving the current logged on user account the domain administrator to get full privileges on this particular database. So in some organizations they might go for an mixed mode, still so we don't have any problems if we install with a mixed mode also. So in this environment, so I'm using it as a Windows authentication mode, and I'm giving a privileges for the domain administrator through which I'm installing this particular things. So if you want to give privileges for analysis services, who has going to have that? So I'm just giving the same user account. So for the reporting services, so select install but do not configure the reporting server. So later we will see that how we can configure the reporting server at the end of the installation. Click on next. So we have specified all the defaults, and just selecting the install. So the installation is completed. Just close this. So once you installation is completed, go to the all programs, SQL Server 2008, and open the SQL Server Management Studio, and let's verify. So put database engine, put dot here, so that we are connecting the local database server. So with this, so we are confirming that the SQL Server database got installed properly, and we are able to see this. So let's go to the start, all programs, SQL Server 2008 R2. We see called as a configuration tools. So here you can see called as a SQL Server configuration manager. Just open it. So let's enable the client connectivity so that the FIM app and System Center Service Manager can connect to the SQL Server database. So go to the client protocols and make sure that TCP is enabled. Go to the network and make sure the TCP IP named pipes is enabled. Close this. Now let's look at the configuration of the reporting services. Go to the SQL Server, go to the configuration tools, go to the reporting services configuration manager. So specify the server name. So we install the SQL Server reporting services on this particular same server and just say connect. So go to the service account, verify that it is running on the account which we gave during the installation. Go to the database. So we are seeing no reporting database is being created. Click on change and select create a new report server database. Test the connectivity. Native mode, the service credentials, and next. So this is going to create a reporting services database. Finish. So once the database gets created, go to the web service URL. So by default it's giving you a warning here. It's called as the reporting database URL is not configured. Click on maximize. So the URL of this reporting server will be :80/report server. Click on apply. So it is going to create a virtual directory under the default website. So once it is done, click on this URL and verify that you are getting the so it is going to give you the reporting server version. So if we are getting this message means the reporting service is being configured properly. Click close. Then go to the reporting manager URL to manage the reporting services. So click on apply. So once this is created, we see that there's no warnings over here. So click open on this. So we should get this home page called as a SQL Server reporting services home without any error messages. So if we got this screen, means the reporting services manager has been completely configured successfully without any issues. So that's how you need to install the SQL Server database and configure the reporting services for the Forefront Identity Manager. So once after the installation of that, restart the SQL Server to get all the changes reflected. So let's see in the second video of how to install the FIM 2010 prerequisites.